The morning sun stretched across the East Coast Naval Base, glinting off rows of polished ships and the steel-gray buildings that housed hundreds of officers and enlisted personnel. The smell of salt and diesel filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of machinery and the occasional bark of orders from training grounds. It was a normal day by any measure, but for some, normalcy was about to be challenged. Captain Elena Ward walked briskly across the parade ground, her crisp uniform immaculate despite the early hour. Every crease on her sleeve, every medal on her chest, spoke of years of dedication and service overseas. She wasn't just another officer transferred to a new post. She carried the weight of experience, survival, and respect earned in the most hostile corners of the world. But not everyone at the base knew that yet. She paused at the edge of the mess hall, glancing briefly at the line of soldiers waiting for breakfast. The chatter was loud, casual, and mostly careless. Eyes followed her briefly before returning to their conversations. Elena knew she wasn't expected to be noticed, at least not in a positive way. Being a woman in a male-dominated environment like this meant navigating a minefield of judgment, assumptions, and occasionally, hostility. Inside the mess hall, the smell of burnt toast and coffee lingered in the air. Clinks of silverware on trays and the hum of idle chatter filled the room. Soldiers laughed loudly in groups, exchanging jokes that often teetered on the edge of disrespect. It was a space where rank mattered, but familiarity blurred the lines, especially when dealing with someone new, someone unknown, someone they didn't take seriously. A group of lower-ranked soldiers sat in the corner, snickering among themselves. At the center was Private Mason Cole, a young man with a careless grin and more arrogance than experience. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, observing the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. When he noticed the woman standing by the door, his smirk widened. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering despite the murmurs around her. "She's just another desk jockey," Mason whispered to his friend, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Bet she's never lifted more than a coffee cup in her life." "Careful," his friend murmured. "She looks, I don't know, different." Mason chuckled. Different means easy to test. He didn't know why he felt compelled to push boundaries, but there was a thrill in humiliating those who looked untouchable. In his mind, it was just a joke, a little fun before breakfast. Elena moved through the line quietly, her movements precise and deliberate. She didn't rush, didn't stumble, didn't glance at anyone expectantly. She was a professional, trained to observe, adapt, and act with purpose. The whispers followed her, but she ignored them, her focus on the small tray in front of her and the ritual of breakfast, a grounding act before the chaos of the day. Mason's eyes followed her every step. There was something in the way she moved that made him uneasy, though he refused to admit it. His grin returned, wider this time, filled with mischief. "Watch this," he muttered to no one in particular, as he reached for the cafeteria urn filled with steaming hot milk. He waited until she bent slightly to pour her drink, then, with a swift, exaggerated motion, tipped the container so that a stream of scalding milk splashed across her chest and shoulder. The sound of liquid hitting fabric was sharp, startling. Gasps filled the room, and several soldiers froze mid-bite. Elena recoiled slightly from the heat, but not from shock. Her hand instinctively pressed against the wet patch on her uniform, feeling the sting of the burn through the thin material. She looked up, and her eyes met Mason's. There was no anger, no hysteria, just calm, unflinching intensity. "You'll regret that, soldier," she said softly, each word deliberate and precise, carrying a weight that made the room shiver. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The mess hall erupted almost immediately. Laughter, nervous and unsure, mingled with whispers. "Did you see that?" She didn't even scream. one soldier exclaimed. Mason laughed loudly, trying to mask the sudden tightness in his chest. Guess she's got a sense of humor, huh? But there was a subtle shift in the room, one that Mason didn't notice immediately. Soldiers stopped for a fraction longer when they spoke her name, voices less sure, eyes lingering with something bordering on respect, or perhaps fear. For the first time, the new captain had made an impression, and it wasn't one that could be easily dismissed. Outside the mess hall, Elena paused, her uniform steaming slightly from the hot milk. She adjusted her jacket and straightened her posture. No one had touched her. No one had apologized, and yet she didn't need them to. She had faced worse in deserts, in war zones, in storm-tossed waters. A splash of milk was nothing more than a test of patience, and patience was a skill she had honed to perfection. As she walked toward her office, her mind was already planning the day ahead. Briefings, personnel evaluations, training exercises, her schedule would be relentless, and she welcomed it. Discipline, order, and respect weren't given freely, especially here. They had to be earned. Mason, on the other hand, sat frozen in the corner, staring at his hands. Something in the way she had looked at him, calm and steady despite the burn, unsettled him. He tried to laugh again, but it came out forced. Around him, the chatter resumed, but he felt strangely isolated, aware that he had underestimated someone who might very well be beyond his comprehension. And he was right, because Mason Cole didn't know the full truth. He didn't know that the woman he had humiliated would soon hold power over every aspect of his life on the base. He didn't know she was more than just a captain. He didn't know that, by the end of the week, she would stand before the entire base as the newly appointed Rear Admiral Elena Ward, a leader whose authority would turn arrogance into discipline, mockery into respect, and chaos into order. And for Mason, that day would mark the beginning of a long reckoning, a lesson in humility, courage, and the kind of leadership that could not be ignored. The mess hall had barely recovered from the incident. Soldiers whispered nervously, glancing at Captain Elena Ward as she left, her uniform soaked and still smoldering from the hot milk. The usual clamor of breakfast conversations had turned into a quiet, uneasy buzz. Private Mason Cole tried to laugh again, louder this time, but the sound was hollow even to his own ears. He glanced around, realizing for the first time that no one else seemed amused. Mason's friends nudged him, trying to hide their own uncertainty. "Relax, man," one whispered. "It's just a joke." Mason forced a grin, nodding, but a small knot of anxiety had formed in his stomach. He had been so sure this would be harmless fun. He hadn't considered that he had just crossed a line, though he didn't yet know how far that line stretched. Meanwhile, Helena walked with deliberate pace to her office. Her movements were fluid, controlled, and unhurried. Each step spoke of someone who had faced far worse than scalding milk. She pressed a hand to the burn on her chest, wincing slightly at the sting, but her face remained calm, composed. She knew her reaction in public mattered more than her pain. Any display of weakness, even minor, could undermine her authority in a place where men were quick to judge and quick to dismiss women in command. By the time she entered her office, her mind had already shifted from the immediate discomfort to the larger context. She would not react with anger or retaliation. This was a test, both of her patience and of the base's readiness to respect discipline. In her previous deployments, she had learned that humiliation and pranks often revealed more about the instigators than the targets. And Mason? He had just revealed that he lacked the maturity to recognize authority, at least for now. Back in the mess hall, Mason's bravado began to falter. The soldiers who had laughed nervously were now exchanging glances of doubt. A few, who had once been quick to mock others, began to feel a subtle unease. Captain Ward had left the room, but the weight of her presence lingered. There was an intensity in her eyes, even from a distance, that told everyone present she would not be so easily dismissed. "Do you think she's going to report this?" whispered a young sailor nearby. Mason waved submissively. "Nah, she's probably too soft to make a big deal out of it." But that assumption was dangerously wrong. Hours passed, and Mason tried to shrug off the morning's incident as though it were nothing. He went through his duties mechanically, the joke replaying in his mind despite his attempts to convince himself it didn't matter. Every glance he stole toward Alana's office reminded him that she was out there, unflustered and composed, entirely unaffected by the prank that had so embarrassed him. By late morning, a formal announcement echoed through the base's public address system. Soldiers lined the parade ground as the commanding officer, a stern man with decades of experience, stepped forward. The chatter died down immediately. Eleni Ward appeared behind him, her uniform pristine, her medals catching the sunlight, her demeanor commanding. She stood taller, stronger, more imposing than she had in the mess hall. "Gentlemen," the officer began, his voice steady, "it is my honor to introduce your new commanding officer, Rear Admiral Elena Ward." A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Some men blinked, confused. Some leaned in, trying to assess whether this was a practical joke or an official announcement. And then Mason's stomach dropped. The woman he had humiliated, so casually, so thoughtlessly, was the very person now charged with overseeing their entire division. Elena stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the assembly. She didn't glance at Mason directly, but when her eyes did meet his, the intensity was unmistakable. She didn't need to shout, to scold, or to brandish her authority. The room fell silent under the weight of her presence. "Discipline," she began, her voice calm yet commanding, "is not about fear. It is not about punishment. Discipline is about respect. And respect, gentlemen, is earned every day, through every action you take, every decision you make, and every word you speak. From today onward, I expect your best. Anything less is unacceptable." The murmurs that had been building among the soldiers vanished. Mason swallowed hard, his hands suddenly clammy. He had never imagined the consequences of his prank would culminate in such an intense confrontation, even if it wasn't direct. He had humiliated a superior officer. Yes, but this superior officer wasn't just anyone. She was the commanding figure of the entire base. Elena continued, moving slowly down the line of soldiers. "I will not tolerate mockery, carelessness, or disrespect. Those who seek to undermine discipline will find themselves held accountable, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity for the safety and success of this base. Consider this your warning." Mason shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the joke he had thought harmless was now potentially career-threatening. He looked to his fellow soldiers for support, but the expressions on their faces were mixed fear, uncertainty, and begrudging respect. It became clear that no one would defend him. He was alone, facing the consequences of his actions in a way he hadn't anticipated. As the ceremony ended, Elena returned to her office, leaving Mason standing among the ranks, stunned and chastened. For the first time in his life, he felt the sting of true authority, not the hierarchical, bureaucratic authority that came with rank, but the kind that demanded recognition through presence, competence, and moral force. In the days that followed, Mason would find himself under closer scrutiny. Every misstep, every word spoken carelessly would be noted. He would learn quickly that this was not a woman to be trifled with. And yet, there was a strange mixture of fear and admiration brewing inside him. He could sense that behind her calm exterior lay a strength forged by experience, tested by fire, and tempered with wisdom. That afternoon, as the base returned to its usual rhythm, Mason found himself replaying the events repeatedly in his mind. The hot milk, the stunned silence in the mess hall, the revelation of her rank, her commanding presence, it all combined into a lesson he would never forget. One thought dominated his mind. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, had made a mistake he would spend the rest of the week, and perhaps much longer, paying for. Elena, for her part, went about her day with the precision and focus that had earned her respect in far more dangerous theaters than a naval base breakfast line. She knew that patience, discipline, and strategic observation were her greatest tools. The hot milk incident, minor as it might seem, would serve as a subtle measure of character from Mason Cole and others who sought to challenge her authority. By nightfall, Mason sat alone in his quarters, replaying the moment over and over. The initial thrill of the prank had vanished completely, replaced by a gnawing anxiety he couldn't shake. He didn't yet understand that this moment was just the beginning, a prelude to the rigorous lessons in discipline, respect, and leadership that Admiral Elena Ward would instill in him. And for Elena, the day had been a quiet victory. Without a single raised voice or public reprimand, she had asserted her authority. The soldiers had seen it, felt it, and understood it. Mason had learned, in a single day, that the woman he had mocked was not someone to be trifled with, and the consequences of disrespect would follow him far beyond a simple apology. The morning air on the naval base carried a brisk chill, but the tension was hotter than any summer sun. Word of Captain Elena Ward's promotion to Rear Admiral had spread like wildfire overnight. Soldiers whispered in corners, passing along every rumor and speculation. Mason Cole, however, had little interest in gossip. His mind was preoccupied with the realization that the woman he had humiliated was now his commanding officer. Not just any officer, but the most powerful person on the base. Mason's pride, which had carried him through his reckless antics, now felt fragile, almost fragile as glass. He couldn't shake the image of her unwavering gaze in the mess hall, the calm precision with which she had spoken to the assembly, and the cold weight of authority she radiated. Every instinct screamed that he had underestimated her, dangerously so. As he walked to morning drills, the usual camaraderie felt strained. His friends avoided eye contact, and even the veterans, normally quick to mock, were subdued. Mason realized, with a growing knot of unease, that his status on the base had changed overnight. He was no longer merely a prankster. He was a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Admiral Ward had already begun her day. She moved through the corridors with an aura of purpose, her boots clicking steadily on the polished floors. Soldiers snapped to attention as she passed, her presence commanding respect without a single word. Her office, a space meticulously organized, served as both her command center and a place of strategic oversight. She had already reviewed personnel files, mission schedules, and the base's operational readiness reports. The mess hall incident lingered in her mind, not as a personal grievance, but as a teaching opportunity. Discipline and respect were the cornerstones of her command. She knew that if soldiers saw authority as optional, the consequences could ripple far beyond a spilled cup of milk. Mason's behavior was a symptom, a glimpse into a culture of casual disrespect that needed correction. By mid-morning, Mason found himself summoned to the Admiral's office. The call was delivered not as a threat, but as a standard procedure, though Mason could barely breathe as he approached. His uniform, usually worn with careless pride, now felt heavy, almost suffocating. Each step toward her office seemed to echo with his misjudgment. "Private Cole," Admiral Ward said as he entered, her voice calm, yet carrying the weight of command. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, pinned him to the spot. "Take a seat." Mason obeyed, his hands gripping the edges of the chair. He tried to speak, but words lodged in his throat, blocked by nerves and shame. "I am aware of your actions this morning," she continued, her tone measured. "Spilling milk might seem trivial to you, but it reflects a deeper issue, your lack of judgment, your failure to recognize authority, and your casual disrespect for the people around you." Mason swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I didn't mean. Intent is irrelevant," she interrupted softly, her gaze piercing. Consequences are real. Leadership is not about titles or medals. It's about accountability, discipline, and respect. You've had your first lesson. The words cut deeper than Mason expected. He had always considered himself clever, charismatic, and untouchable in his small circle. Yet here he was, seated before someone whose authority dwarfed him, whose calm control made his bravado seem childish. Admiral Ward continued, "You will not be punished further for this incident. Instead, you will prove your capability through service. I am assigning you to assist in logistics for the upcoming readiness drills. You will follow instructions precisely, demonstrate initiative, and show respect to every officer and crew member, without exception." Mason nodded quickly, relief mingling with lingering anxiety. The assignment was difficult, yes, but it was an opportunity to redeem himself. Still, he could feel the weight of every eye on him, every whisper behind his back, as he walked back to his quarters. The next few days tested him in ways he had never imagined. From dawn drills to late-night inspections, Mason found himself constantly under observation. Every command he executed was scrutinized. Every mistake, no matter how small, reminded him that humor and recklessness had no place under Admiral Ward's watch. For the first time, he felt the difference between authority and fear, between leadership and ego. Meanwhile, Admiral Ward moved through the base like a force of nature. She inspected training exercises, evaluated missions, and listened to complaints and suggestions alike. Soldiers who had once laughed at her now paused in silence, waiting for her judgment. Even those who had previously doubted her leadership began to understand her philosophy. Strength was not about intimidation, but about presence, courage, and the ability to inspire confidence while maintaining discipline. Mason observed her in action during a drill. Smoke machines and simulated explosions filled the training field, creating chaos that tested the soldiers' reactions. Yet, amid the confusion, Admiral Ward's calm commands cut through the noise. "Cole, secure the rear perimeter. Johnson, follow the protocol for the injured. Move now." Her voice was steady, authoritative, unyielding. Mason followed her orders, his movements precise and careful. He realized, with a sinking mix of awe and fear, that her authority was not just in her words, but in her actions. By the end of the drill, Mason was exhausted, drenched in sweat and grime. Yet something had shifted. He had glimpsed the difference between his previous approach to life on the base, careless, irreverent, and the kind of disciplined focus Admiral Ward demanded. It was not just respect he owed her. It was a recognition of her competence and courage. That evening, Mason walked past the mess hall, pausing to watch Admiral Ward from a distance as she quietly reviewed the day's reports. The hot milk incident replayed in his mind, now seeming almost insignificant compared to the power and precision she wielded. He felt a mix of shame, admiration, and determination. For the first time, he understood that true authority commanded respect naturally, without threats or arrogance. Over the following week, Mason's interactions with Admiral Ward slowly changed. He no longer sought to joke or mock. He approached his duties seriously, often staying late to ensure tasks were done perfectly. Each day brought new challenges, and each challenge reinforced the lessons she had imparted silently but firmly. Meanwhile, rumors about her career began circulating. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones of her previous missions' war zones where she had saved lives, critical operations she had commanded successfully, and acts of bravery that seemed almost legendary. The woman who had endured the hot milk prank now stood as an icon of discipline and leadership. Mason realized bitterly that he had judged her not by her character or achievements, but by assumptions and appearances. Every laugh, every careless action had been a step closer to embarrassment and consequence. He resolved quietly, in the solitude of his quarters, that he would earn her respect through action, not words, and that his redemption would be slow, deliberate, and unwavering. And for Admiral Ward, the events of that week were a quiet triumph. She had turned a potential disruption into an opportunity to assert authority, teach discipline, and inspire reflection. Mason Cole would learn, through experience rather than lecture, the difference between mockery and respect, between ego and leadership. By the end of the week, Mason no longer looked at her with defiance or amusement. Instead, he watched, silently, as she moved through the base with unwavering poise, commanding authority and earning admiration without raising her voice. The hot milk incident had become a distant memory, overshadowed by the living example of leadership she embodied every day. In the quiet moments before lights out, Mason sat alone, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. The days ahead would challenge him further, testing his discipline, resilience, and respect for authority. But for the first time, he felt a spark of understanding. The woman he had mocked was not only his superior, but a mentor, a guide, and an example of courage and leadership he could no longer ignore. The naval base awoke to a crisp, gray morning, the kind that carried both expectation and tension in the air. The soldiers, still reeling from the announcement of Captain Elena Ward's promotion to Rear Admiral, moved through their routines with cautious curiosity. Rumors lingered. Her past exploits, her decorated career, and now her position as the base's commanding officer. None of it could have prepared them for the quiet force of her presence. Elena Ward had arrived early, as she always did. Her boots clicked against the polished floors of the command center, echoing authority without the need for loud commands. Her first priority was simple: discipline. It wasn't about fear, punishment, or ego. It was about respect, structure, and readiness. Every corner of the base would feel the shift in leadership, and every soldier would be accountable, starting with Mason Cole. Mason arrived at the training yard, his uniform impeccable, his expression tense. The previous week had humbled him, and the hot milk incident replayed constantly in his mind, not as a joke, but as a lesson. Today, he would see firsthand how Admiral Ward intended to transform the base. Cole, a junior officer, called, pointing toward a line of equipment stacked in disarray. Admiral Ward wants you to organize the entire logistics section before morning inspection. Mason swallowed hard, surveying the mountain of crates, boxes, and supplies. Normally, he would have grumbled, complained, or joked. Today, he simply nodded. He had learned that defiance now carried consequences far heavier than any prank. Admiral Ward arrived at the training yard soon after, observing silently from the periphery. Her presence alone changed the atmosphere. Chatter ceased, movements became deliberate, and soldiers straightened instinctively. Mason could feel her gaze, not in anger, but in expectation. Every action was being measured, every decision weighed. Hours passed. Mason labored alongside enlisted men and officers alike, organizing equipment, labeling supplies, and correcting errors. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and his muscles ached. But he noticed something new. He felt the satisfaction of work done well, of effort recognized. For the first time, he understood the value of discipline beyond punishment. It was a path to respect. By midday, small victories had begun to emerge. Junior soldiers, once mocking him, now followed his direction without hesitation. Mason realized that under Ward's influence, leadership wasn't about authority on paper. It was about consistency, fairness, and competence. He also noticed subtle nods of approval from the Admiral herself, silent acknowledgments that encouraged progress without humiliation. Elena, meanwhile, moved through the base like a force of calm precision. She checked schedules, evaluated ongoing drills, and listened carefully to reports of minor infractions. Nothing escaped her attention, not a misaligned uniform, not a sloppy formation, not a careless remark. Yet she never raised her voice unnecessarily. Her presence alone enforced order. Soldiers began to understand that leadership wasn't about shouting commands. It was about being steady, reliable, and unflinchingly competent. By late afternoon, Mason was exhausted but determined. His arms ached from lifting crates, and his uniform was streaked with sweat and dust. But he felt something he had never felt before: pride. He had worked hard, followed orders, and earned the acknowledgement of both his peers and, indirectly, the Admiral herself. The hot milk incident, which had once seemed humiliating, now served as a constant reminder of why respect mattered and how easily it could be lost. As the day wound down, Admiral Ward called the soldiers to the parade ground for a briefing. They assembled quickly, standing in neat lines, their eyes forward, their posture correct. Mason found himself in the middle of the formation, his back straight, his hands at his sides, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't felt before. "Discipline is not just about following orders," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "It's about understanding responsibility, anticipating needs, and performing tasks even when no one is watching. Each of you represents the strength and reputation of this base. You are accountable to each other, to your country, and to the people whose lives depend on your decisions." The soldiers listened intently. Even those who had mocked her in the past were silent now, captivated by the authority she wielded, not through fear, but through competence, courage, and integrity. Mason felt a twinge of guilt for his past behavior, but also a budding determination to prove himself worthy of the trust and guidance she offered. Over the following week, Ward's leadership reshaped the base. Morning drills became rigorous yet purposeful. Tasks were assigned strategically, ensuring that every soldier's skills were tested and utilized. Mason, once careless and impulsive, now worked with methodical precision, learning the art of anticipation and preparation. He discovered the satisfaction of being part of a well-oiled machine, where every individual effort contributed to the greater mission. One afternoon, Mason made a mistake during equipment inspection. A crate had been misplaced, throwing off the flow of inventory. He braced himself, expecting a scolding or reprimand. Instead, Admiral Ward approached silently, observing the error with calm intensity. "Cole," she said, her tone neutral. "Notice what went wrong. Fix it, learn from it. Then move forward. No anger, no humiliation, just guidance." Mason felt a surge of gratitude mixed with renewed determination. He understood now that respect was not won through fear or punishment, but through consistency, competence, and accountability. Each day, he became more aware of the impact of his actions on the base, his peers, and himself. By evening, the base had transformed. Soldiers moved with purpose, laughter was tempered by awareness, and a new culture of respect began to take root. Mason, exhausted but reflective, stood at attention as he watched Admiral Ward review the day's operations. The hot milk incident was a distant memory, overshadowed by the reality of her leadership and the lessons he had learned through observation, effort, and humility. In quiet moments, Mason found himself reconsidering the assumptions he had made about authority, gender, and leadership. He realized that his arrogance had blinded him to qualities he now deeply admired: courage, intelligence, and unwavering composure under pressure. For the first time, he felt a desire not just to avoid mistakes, but to genuinely excel, to earn respect rather than demand it. Admiral Ward, observing the base from her office window, allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The base had responded to her leadership. Discipline had improved, and even the most resistant soldiers were beginning to adapt. Mason Cole's transformation had begun not as a punishment, but as a consequence of responsibility and exposure to true authority. The sun set over the naval base, casting long shadows across the parade ground. Soldiers returned to their quarters, reflecting on the day, the lessons learned, and the woman who had changed everything. Mason walked quietly, exhausted yet determined, understanding that his journey of growth and redemption had only just begun. For Admiral Ward, the day was a quiet triumph. She had turned potential chaos into order, disrespect into reflection, and indifference into motivation. A hot milk incident had served its purpose. It revealed weaknesses, set boundaries, and paved the way for meaningful transformation. By nightfall, the base rested under a new order, guided by a leader whose presence demanded respect, whose actions inspired confidence, and whose calm authority reminded everyone, including Mason, that leadership was earned, not assumed. The afternoon sun glinted off the water as the naval vessel USS Sentinel maneuvered through the training waters. Smoke curled from its engine compartment, subtle at first, but growing in intensity. Sailors aboard the ship carried out routine drills, unaware that a critical malfunction was about to transform a normal exercise into a life-threatening emergency. Back on the base, Admiral Elena Ward was reviewing operational schedules when the alarms rang loud, urgent, echoing across the docks. Without hesitation, she grabbed her radio and sprinted toward the command center. Her eyes narrowed, instincts sharpening. Every drill she had conducted, every simulation she had overseen, had prepared her for this moment. "Report." She barked into the radio, her voice calm but commanding. "Fire in the engine room, Admiral." Crew trapped below deck. Smoke spreading fast. The voice on the other end was frantic. Ward didn't hesitate. She grabbed her safety jacket, helmet, and gloves, signaling to her officers. "Cole, take the secondary team to secure the lower deck. Johnson, get the evacuation protocols running immediately." Her commands were precise, leaving no room for hesitation. Soldiers scrambled into action, following her orders as if her presence alone could guide them through the chaos. Mason Cole, now part of the logistics and emergency response team, felt his heart pound. The theoretical drills, the long hours of discipline, had prepared him for this moment, but the reality of smoke, heat, and fear was far different. He followed her instructions meticulously, coordinating with other crew members to guide trapped sailors toward safety. On board the vessel, flames licked the walls of the engine room. Thick black smoke filled the compartments, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Sailors coughed, choking on smoke, their panic palpable. But amid the chaos, a figure moved with uncanny precision. It was Admiral Ward, helmet strapped tightly, her uniform scorched slightly at the edges, guiding crews, extinguishing fires, and ensuring that every decision prioritized lives over protocol. Mason followed her lead, shouting directions and helping lift injured sailors. The fear he had once known, when he humiliated her with a reckless prank, had transformed into awe. He now understood the magnitude of her leadership. She wasn't commanding for recognition. She was commanding to save lives. The fire roared, flames threatening to engulf the lower deck. Mason saw a sailor trapped beneath a fallen beam, struggling to move. His first instinct was to hesitate, fearing for his own safety. But a glance at Admiral Ward's calm determination steeled him. "Move, Cole, now!" she shouted. Mason acted instantly, lifting the beam with the help of another sailor and pulling the injured man free. Smoke choked his lungs and sweat poured down his face, but Mason pushed forward. Every command Ward gave was executed with precision, and every order he followed reminded him that discipline wasn't punishment, it was survival. The fire, though terrifying, became a crucible, refining his understanding of leadership, courage, and respect. Meanwhile, Admiral Ward moved deeper into the chaos, ensuring that no sailor was left behind. She found another crew member pinned under debris near the engine. With the help of Mason and two other sailors, she lifted the heavy obstruction, guiding the man to safety. Her calm authority inspired everyone around her. Even in the face of life-threatening danger, she was unwavering, her focus absolute. As the fire began to subside under coordinated efforts, Mason felt a shift inside himself. Fear was still there, but it was now tempered by purpose, discipline, and a growing sense of capability. He had followed Admiral Ward's orders, acted decisively, and contributed to saving lives. The lessons she had imparted during the past week discipline, respect, focus, and accountability were no longer abstract concepts. They were survival skills. By the time the fire was fully contained, the crew, exhausted and soot-streaked, gathered on deck. Admiral Ward conducted a head count, her eyes scanning for every missing sailor. The list came back complete. Not a single life lost. Her calm demeanor remained intact, but Mason could see the faint exhaustion on her face, the toll that constant responsibility demanded. After the emergency, the crew returned to the base, shaken but alive. Mason walked alongside Admiral Ward, the weight of the past week's lessons now fully realized. He remembered the hot milk incident, the humiliation, and his own arrogance. That moment seemed distant, almost trivial, compared to what he had just witnessed. Later, in a debriefing session, Ward addressed the team. Today, we faced real danger. Mistakes could have cost lives. Each of you has a responsibility, not just to yourself, but to your fellow sailors. Discipline and respect are not abstract concepts. They are the difference between life and death. Let today's events remind you of that. Mason raised his hand during the Q&A session, his voice steady but filled with humility. Admiral, I want to apologize again for my behavior in the mess hall and for underestimating you. Today I saw what true leadership looks like, and I understand now what it means to follow, serve, and respect. Admiral Ward studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Cole, you've learned more today than many officers learn in years of service. Take this experience and let it guide you. Remember, leadership is earned every day through action, decision, and accountability. That evening, Mason walked to the docks, watching the sun set over the water. The smoke had cleared, the vessel was secured, and the sailors were safe. He thought about the journey he had begun, the humiliation, the lessons, the training, and now the crucible of fire. For the first time, he felt true respect, not just for Admiral Ward, but for the principles she embodied: courage, discipline, and unwavering commitment to her team. Admiral Ward, standing nearby, watched him silently. She had guided him through his first real test, and she knew there would be more. But she also knew that Mason had taken his first steps toward transformation. The hot milk incident, the reckless arrogance, the uncertainty, all of it had led to this moment of clarity, growth, and newfound respect. As night fell, the base rested under the quiet hum of operations. Mason, exhausted and reflective, understood that leadership wasn't about rank or authority alone. It was about action, courage, and the ability to inspire others through example. And he knew, without doubt, that Admiral Ward embodied those qualities in every sense. The events of that day, the fire, the danger, and the life-saving actions would remain etched in the memories of everyone involved. Mason realized that he had been given a second chance, a chance to grow, to earn respect, and to become more than the careless prankster he had been. Admiral Ward had not only saved lives that day, she had also transformed a young soldier's understanding of responsibility, discipline, and leadership. For Mason Cole, the journey of redemption had begun in earnest. The lessons of the mess hall were trivial compared to this experience, but they had laid the groundwork for understanding authority, humility, and courage. And for Admiral Ward, the day was a testament to the power of leadership, not through intimidation or fear, but through competence, calm, an unwavering dedication to the people under her command. The base was unusually quiet the morning after the fire aboard the USS Sentinel. Smoke had long dissipated, but the events of the previous day lingered heavily in everyone's minds. Officers and enlisted personnel moved with purposeful calm, but the tension remained residual from the adrenaline and fear that had coursed through the crew. For Mason Cole, the quiet was deafening. Every moment offered him time to reflect, and he could no longer escape the truth. He had been reckless, arrogant, and dismissive of someone whose competence had saved lives. Mason's first instinct was avoidance. He wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the maze of corridors and training grounds, hoping to dodge the inevitable confrontation. But he knew he couldn't. His conscience would not allow it, and neither would the realization that Admiral Elena Ward had quietly observed his every action throughout the crisis. She had seen him falter, act with fear, but ultimately rise to the occasion. That was her way of observing, assessing, and allowing growth through action rather than punishment. By mid-morning, Mason found himself standing outside the door of Admiral Ward's office. His hand hovered over the handle, and for a moment he considered retreating. But he straightened his back, recalling the discipline he had been practicing for weeks. Deep down, he understood that respect was not granted by rank alone. It had to be earned through honesty, humility, and action. He entered quietly, and Ward looked up from her reports, her expression calm, as always. Her eyes met his with that unflinching intensity that had both unnerved and inspired him from the very first day. "Sit down, Cole," she said, her tone neutral. No reprimand, no anger, just expectation. Mason took a deep breath. "Ma'am," he began, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts. I owe you a proper apology. Not just for the milk in the mess hall, but for everything, the disrespect, the assumptions, the way I treated you and others. I was wrong." Admiral Ward listened silently, her hands folded neatly on the desk. She did not interrupt, allowing him the space to speak, a subtle lesson in itself. Owning one's mistakes required courage, not just words. "I thought I was being funny or clever," Mason continued, his voice growing steadier as he confronted the truth. "I didn't realize what I was doing, and I certainly didn't understand who you were or the leadership you embody. After yesterday, I see it now. I see that real leadership isn't about rank or intimidation. It's about action, courage, and accountability." Elena Ward leaned back slightly, her expression still calm but thoughtful. "Cole," she said finally, her voice measured, "acknowledging mistakes is the first step. Real growth comes from learning, correcting, and demonstrating that understanding through your actions." Mason nodded vigorously. "I understand, ma'am. I want to do better. I want to learn. I want to earn your respect." Ward's gaze softened just slightly, a rare flicker of approval passing through her eyes. "Respect is earned twice," she said quietly. "First, by recognizing the mistake and taking responsibility. Second, by showing through consistent behavior that you have truly learned. Your actions over the past week and during the fire indicate potential. Now you must continue to prove it." For Mason, her words were both a challenge and an encouragement. He had feared punishment, humiliation, or even dismissal. Instead, he found himself being offered mentorship, guidance, and an opportunity to grow. He realized that true leadership did not crush mistakes. It transformed them into lessons, forging stronger character from humility and effort. Over the following weeks, Mason worked tirelessly to redeem himself. He volunteered for tasks others avoided, stayed late to ensure orders were executed flawlessly, and began mentoring junior soldiers, teaching them lessons he had learned the hard way. Admiral Ward observed him closely, offering guidance when necessary, but mostly allowing him to find his own path. Her mentorship was subtle but effective. She didn't instruct him on what to feel, only on how to act, make decisions, and think strategically. The soldiers noticed the change. Mason, once careless and mocking, was now focused, disciplined, and reliable. He moved with purpose, executed tasks efficiently, and displayed a quiet confidence that commanded attention without arrogance. His peers began to respond differently, some even seeking his guidance, a reflection of the transformation Admiral Ward had inspired in him. One afternoon, during a routine inspection, Mason approached Ward to ask a question about supply logistics. Instead of dismissing him or correcting him sharply, she paused, considered his perspective, and offered guidance. "Good observation, Cole," she said. "Consider this approach instead. It's more efficient and reduces risk." Mason listened carefully, absorbing every word, and left the room feeling a mixture of pride and renewed determination. Even beyond official duties, Mason began to internalize her lessons. He realized that respect and discipline were not temporary measures for survival. They were lifelong principles. He started reflecting on past behaviors, noting moments when he had been careless, dismissive, or arrogant. Each reflection reinforced his commitment to change. Ward, too, saw the growth. She understood that transformation required patience, observation, and the occasional challenge. The hot milk incident, the fire, and the subsequent responsibilities had shaped Mason into a soldier capable of discipline, initiative, and leadership. He had moved from fear to action, from arrogance to humility, from mockery to genuine respect. That evening, Mason found himself walking along the docks, reflecting on the past weeks. The water was calm, the sky streaked with orange and purple hues from the setting sun. He thought about the lessons he had learned: humility, accountability, courage, and leadership. And at the center of it all was Admiral Ward, a woman who had transformed not just the base, but his understanding of what it meant to be a leader. In a quiet moment, he whispered to himself, "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." He knew she had heard it not as a request for forgiveness, but as a recognition of guidance and mentorship. Admiral Ward watched from the edge of the pier, silently observing the young soldier she had guided. She allowed herself a small nod, a rare acknowledgement of satisfaction. Mason had begun his journey of true redemption. He had learned that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned through discipline, courage, and consistent action. And she knew that this was only the beginning of his transformation. The events of the fire, the previous incidents, and the lessons learned during weeks of rigorous training had forged a new foundation for Mason. The hot milk, once a symbol of arrogance and recklessness, had become the first step in a journey toward understanding authority, accountability, and leadership. By the time night fell, the base was quiet. Soldiers rested, officers reviewed reports, and the docks were serene once more. Mason, reflecting on the day and his journey, understood that real leadership demanded patience, courage, and empathy. Admiral Ward had shown him the way not through anger or punishment, but through example, guidance, and unwavering presence. In the days that followed, Mason approached his duties with renewed focus. He learned to anticipate challenges, guide his peers effectively, and maintain discipline under pressure. Admiral Ward continued her quiet mentorship, allowing him to grow while maintaining the high standards that defined her command. Their dynamic evolved from one of punishment and fear to one of guidance and mutual respect, a transformation that would shape Mason's future and leave a lasting impact on the base. The morning fog rolled off the water, casting a pale, ethereal glow across the base. It was the kind of morning that demanded alertness. Every detail mattered, every movement counted. For Mason Cole, it also represented a new chapter. The weeks of discipline, reflection, and mentorship under Admiral Ward had begun to reshape him. The boy who had once laughed at authority, who had thought pranks were harmless, was now a soldier focused, alert, and determined to prove himself through action rather than words. Today, the base faced a complex set of coordinated drills, testing readiness, logistics, and quick decision-making under pressure. For Mason, this was more than practice. It was a proving ground. He was assigned to oversee a critical supply operation, a responsibility that required precision, foresight, and leadership. A minor mistake could delay the exercise, potentially endanger others, or reveal weaknesses in the base's readiness. Mason felt the weight of responsibility, but this time it was different. Instead of panic or fear, he felt purpose. Admiral Ward watched the operation from the command tower. Her eyes scanned every detail, assessing the performance of every soldier, officer, and team member. Mason, she knew, had the potential to be more than competent. He had begun transforming into a true leader. But potential was not enough. He would need to demonstrate consistency, initiative, and courage under pressure to earn the respect of his peers fully. As the drill commenced, Mason immediately noticed a misalignment in the supply chain, a stack of crates, positioned incorrectly, that could have delayed the operation. In the past, he might have hesitated, unsure of his authority, or deferred to others. But now he acted decisively. He called out instructions to the team, repositioned the crates, and streamlined the workflow. The operation ran smoothly under his guidance, the efficiency of his actions visible to everyone around him. A fellow officer approached him mid-drill. "Cole, good thinking. That adjustment saved us time." Mason nodded, suppressing a small smile. Praise no longer felt like validation. It was evidence that his training, focus, and discipline were paying off. He had earned the right to contribute meaningfully, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Ward's attention remained unbroken. She observed Mason's interactions, his confidence, and the respect he commanded from the soldiers around him. He was no longer the careless, arrogant private who had thrown hot milk at her. He was emerging as a competent, reliable figure within the ranks. Her mentorship, subtle but firm, had guided him to this point. During the final stage of the drill, a simulated emergency was introduced, a sudden equipment failure that could disrupt the operation entirely. Mason's team froze momentarily, uncertain how to respond. Mason stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Team, focus. Follow protocol, stabilize the system, and report issues immediately. We've trained for this. Execute now." Under his direction, the team worked seamlessly, containing the issue and completing the operation with precision. Ward watched silently, recognizing the growth in him, leadership that inspired action, not fear, guidance that empowered, not commanded, and confidence rooted in preparation and knowledge, not arrogance. After the drill, the soldiers gathered on the parade ground for debriefing. The base's leadership, including Admiral Ward, offered feedback, highlighting successes and areas for improvement. When it came time to address Mason, Ward spoke directly. "Cole," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you have demonstrated initiative, competence, and leadership under pressure. You have earned the respect of your team, not through rank, but through consistent action and decision-making. Today, you exemplified the qualities we value in every officer." Mason felt a surge of pride, tempered by humility. This was not a personal victory, but evidence of the lessons he had learned and the effort he had invested. The journey from reckless prankster to respected leader had been long and challenging, but it had culminated in this moment of acknowledgement. The soldiers around him, many of whom had once mocked or doubted him, now looked at him with genuine respect. They saw a soldier who had confronted his flaws, accepted guidance, and proven himself through action. Mason realized that true respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, day by day, through consistency, courage, and competence. Later, Mason approached Admiral Ward privately. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for your guidance, your patience, and for giving me the chance to prove myself. I understand now what leadership really means." Ward regarded him quietly, her expression neutral but approving. "Cole, you've done well. But remember, leadership is a continuous journey, not a destination. Every challenge, every decision, every action is an opportunity to grow. Today you have earned respect, but tomorrow will require even more." Mason nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. He understood that redemption was not a single act, but a continuous effort, a commitment to discipline, humility, and responsibility. In the following days, Mason's transformation became evident to the entire base. He took on additional responsibilities, assisting in planning operations, training new recruits, and mentoring junior soldiers. His demeanor, once careless and irreverent, was now calm, confident, and respectful. He had learned to balance authority with empathy, command with guidance, and action with foresight. Ward, observing him and other soldiers, continued to refine her approach to leadership. She knew that shaping capable leaders required more than drills and discipline. It demanded patience, mentorship, and the willingness to allow growth through real-world challenges. Mason was no longer just a student of her guidance. He was becoming a leader in his own right, capable of inspiring others while embodying the principles she had instilled. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mason walked along the docks, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken. From the hot milk incident to the fire aboard the USS Sentinel, from his initial failures to the lessons learned under Ward's mentorship, he had grown in ways he could not have imagined. He understood the true meaning of leadership. It was not about rank, authority, or fear, but about competence, courage, humility, and the ability to inspire others through action. Admiral Ward joined him silently, her gaze on the horizon. For a moment, words were unnecessary. Mason knew that she recognized his growth, not through praise or reward, but through the quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. "You've done well, Cole," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Leadership requires constant vigilance, reflection, and growth. Today you have proven yourself, but tomorrow will bring new challenges. Are you ready?" Mason straightened, determination in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." For the first time, he felt a profound sense of purpose and belonging. The journey from arrogance to respect, from carelessness to discipline, from mockery to leadership had been arduous, but he had emerged transformed. The hot milk incident, once a source of humiliation, now seemed almost symbolic, a catalyst for growth, a lesson in humility, and the beginning of a path that had led him to respect, competence, and true redemption. As night fell over the base, Mason walked back to his quarters, reflecting on the lessons learned and the future ahead. He knew that challenges would continue, that mistakes might be made, and that growth was never linear. But he also knew that, with discipline, humility, and guidance, he could rise to meet any challenge, and that Admiral Ward would continue to guide, challenge, and inspire him every step of the way. The sun rose slowly over the naval base, casting long shadows across the parade grounds and the docks. The calm water reflected the first light of day, a serene contrast to the chaos and challenges that had defined the past weeks. Yet, for the soldiers stationed here, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Change had swept through the base, quietly but profoundly. Led by a figure whose presence commanded respect and inspired loyalty, Admiral Elena Ward, Mason Cole walked along the grounds, the weight of responsibility and pride steady in his stride. He had transformed from a reckless, arrogant private into a soldier who understood the meaning of discipline, respect, and leadership. Every drill, every emergency, every lesson learned under Ward's guidance had contributed to this metamorphosis. He now approached tasks not for recognition, but because he understood their significance in maintaining the safety, efficiency, and honor of the base. The day began with a routine inspection of the training yard. Soldiers lined up in precise formations, their uniforms immaculate, their movements synchronized, a testament to the discipline Admiral Ward had instilled. Mason moved among them, offering guidance, answering questions, and ensuring that every detail was accounted for. His peers watched him with genuine respect, a stark contrast to the mockery and doubt that had once surrounded him. Ward arrived shortly after, observing the operation from the command tower. Her eyes scanned the yard with the precision of a seasoned strategist. Mason noticed her presence, and while he had long since stopped fearing her authority, he felt the steady reassurance that came from having her as a mentor and guide. He had earned her trust, and now he sought to honor it through action. A minor complication arose during the inspection. A supply crate had been misplaced, threatening to delay the exercise. Mason acted immediately, coordinating his team to correct the error while maintaining order and efficiency. Ward watched closely, noting how he handled the situation, not with panic or frustration, but with calm authority and clear instructions. After the exercise, she approached him. "Cole," she said, her voice calm but authoritative, "your leadership today was exemplary. You anticipated issues, acted decisively, and guided your team effectively. You have earned the respect of your soldiers and peers alike." Mason nodded, humility in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Ward's expression softened slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of pride passing through her eyes. "Leadership is not about me or anyone else. It's about how you shape and inspire those around you. You've learned well, but remember, true leadership is a continuous journey. Stay vigilant, keep improving, and never lose sight of your responsibility to others." The day continued with a series of coordinated drills and operational exercises. Mason led his team through simulated emergencies, supply operations, and tactical scenarios. Each action demonstrated the lessons he had internalized: discipline, focus, accountability, and empathy. Soldiers looked to him for guidance, and he delivered it with calm authority, never overstepping, always listening, always leading by example. By mid-afternoon, the Admiral gathered the entire base for a formal briefing. Mason stood among the ranks, a symbol of the transformation she had fostered, not through intimidation, but through mentorship and example. Ward addressed the assembled soldiers, her voice carrying clarity, authority, and inspiration. "Soldiers of this base," she began, "the past weeks have tested each of us. We faced challenges that demanded courage, discipline, and resilience. I have watched each of you grow, adapt, and rise to these challenges. Today, we recognize not just skill and competence, but character. Respect and leadership are not granted, they are earned through action, courage, and integrity." Her gaze swept across the assembled soldiers. Finally resting briefly on Mason, he straightened instinctively, understanding that she was acknowledging not just his progress, but the potential for continued growth. "You, Mason Cole," she continued, "have demonstrated the qualities we value most in a soldier. You have learned from your mistakes, embraced discipline, and earned the trust of your team. Let your example remind everyone here that true leadership is forged in humility, action, and accountability." Mason felt a mixture of pride and humility. The hot milk incident, which had once been a source of embarrassment, now seemed almost symbolic a turning point that set him on a path toward growth, maturity, and respect. The soldiers erupted in applause, a genuine recognition of both Mason's transformation and Admiral Ward's effective leadership. The cheers weren't just for one individual, they were for the example of integrity, discipline, and courage that had become the standard for the base. Later, Mason approached Ward privately once more. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "I understand now what leadership truly means. I will continue to learn, to guide others, and to honor the trust you've placed in me." Ward regarded him with her usual calm intensity. "Cole, you've come a long way, but remember, leadership is not a destination. It's a responsibility you carry every day. Today you've proven yourself, but every day will require vigilance, reflection, and action. Are you ready to continue this journey?" Mason straightened, determination shining in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the base, Mason walked along the docks, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken. From a careless prank in the mess hall to life-threatening emergencies, from humiliation to mentorship, he had grown in ways he could not have imagined. He had learned the value of humility, the importance of discipline, and the strength of genuine respect. Admiral Ward joined him silently, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The transformation was visible, not just in Mason, but across the base. Soldiers moved with purpose, executed tasks efficiently, and respected both their leaders and one another. The culture of discipline and respect that Ward had fostered had taken root. And Mason's journey of redemption was a testament to the power of mentorship and the Yalfei potential for growth when guidance meets willingness to learn. "You've done well, Cole," Ward said finally, breaking the silence. "But remember, leadership is about more than accomplishment. It's about how you handle challenges, guide others, and inspire trust. Never forget the lessons you've learned here. They will shape you for the rest of your life." Mason nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "I won't forget, ma'am. I promise." As night fell over the base, the lights reflected on the calm water, illuminating a scene of order, discipline, and respect. Mason felt a profound sense of purpose, knowing that he had not only earned the respect of his peers and mentors, but had also discovered the true meaning of leadership. Admiral Ward, standing at the edge of the pier, observed the base she had transformed. She had guided, challenged, and inspired, and in the process, shaped a new generation of soldiers. Mason Cole, once careless and arrogant, now embodied the principles she valued most: discipline, courage, humility, and integrity. The journey from mockery to mentorship, from recklessness to responsibility, had been arduous, but it had forged lasting growth. The base now operated smoothly, efficiently, and with a renewed sense of purpose, guided by the steady hand of Admiral Ward and the example of soldiers like Mason, who had embraced her lessons fully. As the night air cooled and stars appeared overhead, Mason reflected on the path he had taken. The hot milk incident, the fire aboard the USS Sentinel, and the weeks of rigorous training had been catalysts for transformation. He understood that leadership was not a privilege, nor a position, but a responsibility, one that required vigilance, courage, and unwavering commitment. And at that moment, Mason Cole knew, without doubt, that he had earned his place as a soldier worthy of trust, respect, and responsibility. The journey was not over, but he had taken the most important steps: humility, discipline, and the courage to learn from mistakes. Admiral Ward, silently watching him, allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. The lessons had been learned, respect had been earned, and leadership had been solidified. The base, its soldiers, and Mason Cole were all stronger for it, and the story of transformation, mentorship, and growth would remain a lasting legacy for all who served there.